In this section, we're going to cover the part of actually creating our diorama. And what I mean by that is just placing the assets, filling in with the vegetation, and making the general base for our entire scene, to which then we'll eventually light in part two, and then in part three do our cinematics. So for this one, we're just focused on the asset placement. Now, I want to cover a very important thought process that you should have prior to creating your diorama. And most importantly, the most important aspect of creating a diorama is creating these pockets of stories. And what do I mean by that? So with the diorama, the really cool part about creating these is that the user has a full 360-degree view of this scene. So if you approach your diorama by creating it with a fixed camera, i.e., exactly one location that you want it to be seen at all times, it's going to be detrimental. It's going to feel like your diorama's a little, for lack of better terms, dead. So how do we create these pockets of little mini stories? The easiest way to do it is, as you're creating your scene, is to just fly around the map and then just zoom into different places and start kind of theming things out. So for example, like if we look at the scene that's already set up, right, I can zoom my camera in here and we have a little mini scene going on here. If I come down to the right, there's a little story happening here, right? We got a broken down cart, some pots placed in here. It's telling a little story. If we fly around the back, which isn't the most impressive, it's not particularly interesting to look at, but there's things in here that help keep our attention, that help sell a story. Same thing, we can go over to this area here, and we've got another little broken down cart underneath the tree, again telling us a story. So if we keep that principle in mind as you go through and creating your dioramas, they're going to feel much richer. They're going to feel much more interesting and captivate and keep your audience's attention. So that's just the first thing I wanted to cover out of the gate. And then let's just go ahead and jump in, and we'll start actually creating our assets. Now, one thing, if you do want to follow along with this, you can download this asset pack. It's on the Unreal Marketplace. Just search for Stylized African Landscape, and then you'll be able to use all the stuff with it. So let's go ahead and get started with actually kind of building our initial scene. So to get started, I'm going to go ahead and just right-click in here, create a new level, and let's name this Diorama. I'll go ahead and double-click it, save it, open it. Let's jump over to our Meshes tab, and then I'll drag in just this platform A. I'll go ahead and zero out its transformations. I'll press F to frame it, and as you can see, everything's black. Now, if I go into unlit mode, we can see that the platform is actually there, but of course we have no lighting, so we have no way of knowing where we're placing things. Like I said in the kind of the intro here, part two, we're going to be focused more on the lighting aspects, but for this section, obviously we do want to see what it is that we're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a couple things real fast. So the first one is the directional light. I'll kind of offset this a little bit and give me a little bit of context shadow. I'll go up in here to show, visualize, and let's just turn off previous shadow indicators so it doesn't keep telling me I need to rebuild lighting. And then we can just set this to movable. That's fine. I'm not going to add a skylight yet, and I'll explain why here in a second. But what I do want to do is come up here and search for BP, and I'm going to drag in this BP sky sphere. Now, this coloration's fine. It's totally cool. The BP sky sphere itself doesn't actually add any lights, but what it is doing is just kind of adding this backdrop with some clouds and stuff, and it works. Again, not for lighting purposes. This is just simply to help us see what we're doing. And then I'm going to jump back and I'm going to add my skylight. Now, like I said before, I didn't want to add this before, and I'll show why. I don't know if you can see when I start to drag this in there, how we get kind of the orange coloration in this darker area. That's because by default, your skylight comes in with the SLS captured scene, which means it's going to analyze the scene and then it's going to reproject what it captures in that kind of cube map as your coloration. So if we added the skylight before we had our sky sphere, right, if you remember this, the sky was black, the skylight is not really doing anything. Now, of course, we can go in there, we can recapture it after we add it, but it's just easier out of the gate. In fact, I'm probably spending more time explaining this rather than just say, hey, just throw the BP sky sphere in first and then your skylight, and that will help out. So, okay. So again, nothing really fancy with lighting. This is just simply to help us see what it is that we're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and select all these with the exception of my platform. Go ahead and group it, and we'll just name this dash environment. A little trick here, if you put a dash at the start, it will always make sure it's at the top of the list. So then therefore we can keep everything below it. So there we go. Okay. So this is kind of the start. Now we want to start building out our diorama. Now I'm going to take this guy real quick and I'm going to increase it. Let's say, actually we'll go about 3. My scale of 3 should be fine. Okay, and it's probably a little tall. So if I uncheck this little box, I don't know if you guys are aware of this. So when you have this checked, it locks these 3 together. Now it's not the locking the same value, but locking when you change one, it changes the rest. So if I uncheck this, I can then go in and I can change this to like 1.8 or something. So then I have my individual scales. Now if I do relock it, and let's say I take this up to 5, you'll notice it keeps the same ratio. So little tip there with the lockbox, kind of what that means. So okay, so I've added in my base platform. Now what do I do next, right? I want to create this diorama. What is the thought process? If you remember when I talked earlier, it's this idea of we want to share a story. We want to share these little mini stories. So to do that, I'm just going to think of just kind of a little story in my head. Maybe I want this to be, you know, I kind of like this angle here. It's a little step platform. Maybe it's like a little shrine area. Maybe there's an ancient, you know, baobab tree that's in the middle here. Oh, let's just go with that. That'll actually probably be a good one. So to do that, I'll just maybe drag this platform in. I'll go here. Maybe I'll scale it up a little bit. I'll drop this here. Actually, you know what? I kind of like what's happening off the back here. That we're kind of... Yeah, that's actually not too bad. Maybe we'll raise this up a little bit more, make it feel a little more grand. Okay. I actually should back up here for a second and explain the other part of this, right? So when you go about creating a diorama, don't try to do everything all at once, right? Like don't try to make it look perfect out of the gate. Start simple and then we were fine. So with that, the first thing I want to do is just establish kind of this block out area of, you know, where do I want my story? What do I want my story to be told? So okay, you know, so we got this little platform here. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and just drag one of those baobab trees. Maybe this is like our, you know, our ancient baobab tree that's, you know, I don't know, fancy, super awesome. So, okay. So that works for now. Okay, so we're starting to theme this. Now, this brings me to kind of the first point that I want to talk about in terms of your placement. Now, with that, we want to just get our rough storytelling in there, right? So we're not going to be worried about filling in these little sections, which we'll get to here in a minute. It's really just about placing our initial assets. So we got our baobab tree. Maybe, you know, we'll add like a little cart here. Maybe this is, you know, an ancient site or something. Let's go ahead and switch back to local mode. I'll maybe kind of make this look like it was broken down. I'm going to switch back to world space. Little trick here, if you hold down Alt while you're dragging, you'll duplicate something. So we'll go ahead and just drag this guy off. Maybe we'll put him here. Maybe we'll kind of bury him a little bit as if he was kind of in the ground. I realize it's a rock base, but we'll blend it in a little bit later. Okay, and then maybe we'll put like a wheel here. We'll zoom in, kind of rotate it. Kind of do this. Maybe it's propped up against there. Okay, and maybe we'll add just another one here. And actually, let's turn our snapping on real fast so we've got something. And then I'll place it flat. Actually, we'll take movement snapping off. Again, there's nothing really spectacularly like super secret here about placing your stuff, right? We're simply just trying to create a little story here that's happening. Actually, you know what? Let's keep doing this. Maybe we'll add some pots. Actually here, maybe at the base of the tree. Again, holding my Alt trick, I'll move him. Maybe rotate a little bit. Maybe we'll move some of these. You know, we'll scale them up and down. Another little trick here when you guys are designing, it's always good to design in threes. So for example, I put 3 pots here. Maybe this guy's kind of rotated off. I'll go back to world space real quick just so I can move him. There we go. Kind of raise him up a little bit so it doesn't look like he's off. Right, so there's kind of a little pocket of 3. I'll take him, move him off as well. I kind of like this little pottery thing here. Maybe this is like a little incense burning thing. We'll kind of scatter some of these guys around. Maybe some littles. Again, there's our group of 3. Maybe we'll put something off here. Let's drag one more in here real quick, and that should be fine. So, okay, so there we go. So, I mean, immediately we're already starting to see that there's really kind of a cool little theme here going on, right? Like we're starting to tell that story. So that's the very, very first part. Okay, so we'll kind of just leave this as is, and then let's move on to the second part, which is really kind of more fleshing this out. So before we do that, I'll kind of pause the video real quick, and I'll just fill this out a little bit more and create kind of a little story that I want, and then we'll pick up from there. All right, so I've gone in and I've added just a little bit more clutter. So I've added a little bit more trees. Again, our kind of this baobab in the middle is our center focus, and I've just added some of these auxiliary flanking ones again to kind of draw your attention to the middle here. And then I've added a little bit more pottery. Now you're probably wondering why these guys are floating here. This is another little trick that I want to show you guys. So I've dropped these pots in here. And I've kind of stacked them where they're not necessarily hitting each other. Now, I guess I should say, let me preface with this one. You've got to have good collision for this. So if I go to player collision, you can see that they're not intersecting each other, but they're kind of floating here. So this will make sense here in a second. So with it, I've simply kind of set them apart. And when I selected them, I just said simulate physics. Now I'm going to go up to my tab here, and by default, it's selected viewport, but we're going to run simulate. So if I hit simulate, you'll notice that they fall, which is awesome. It gives me a really cool effect. But if I hit stop, they reset. So let's go ahead and do that again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these. Now, if you notice the little orange icon, means that it has physics and it's running. So I'm going to select all of these pots because I have a few that are over here as well that kind of look like they spilled out of this cart. So if I select these and right click, there's this thing that says keep simulation changes. So I'll do keep simulation changes, press stop, and bam, there we go. Now they're in position. So really cool, fun trick to kind of make it look, like it is a little bit more realistic. So, so there we go. So that kind of themes our scene a little bit. In fact, actually, I'm going to go up real fast to my skylight. I'm just going to bump up his intensity just so we can kind of see a little bit in the dark areas. Okay, so now we have, oops, we should probably save. So now we have the beginnings of our scene, right? The beginnings of our story. So how do we make it look a little more realistic? That is kind of the second point of after you establish that initial story, and that is kind of filling in the transition areas. So what do I mean by that? So with our platform here and this base, right, we have this really harsh transition point. We've got it as well at kind of the base of our trees where they hit the rocks. Not so much for the decorative bits, but more so for the larger items. So to help ground this scene and make it feel more realistic and more lived in, we're going to help to blend those transition zones. So how do we go about that? Well, the first thing that I'll say is we absolutely don't want to approach it at the start by starting with vegetation, right? We don't want to add more trees and bushes to try to help those gaps. There's several reasons for that, but my recommendation is stay away from doing vegetation till the last bit, which we'll cover. But what we want to do in between that is add extra bits of geometry, extra bits of clutter to help make that possible. So let's start here at this little section, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so we can see that people could eventually walk up here if we're telling the story, but that's a huge jump to do. So let's go ahead and make just maybe like some pseudo stairs. So there's a couple ways we could do that. If I look at this, so it's platform B. We could duplicate this guy. If I press Alt, we can drag out. Maybe we'll scale him, down a little bit. Now, granted, we've got some repetition here, so just simply rotate it around a little bit. So, okay, that's actually not too bad. Maybe we'll come out again, hold down Alt and duplicate, and let's rotate it again just to give us a little variation. And maybe we'll scale it down, scale this guy up, something like that. So, okay, we'll zoom out a little bit. Okay, so that's actually looking a little bit better. I like that. We still kind of have a real harsh kind of staircase, but I'll show you the next point of this is, let's go ahead and just drag this rock formation. Maybe I'll take him here. Maybe I'll scale it down a little bit, and then I'll break that up. We'll kind of hide that a little bit, and there we go. Okay, so that's actually looking much better. Let's take, let's actually use that same rock formation. Let's take them down here, and maybe we'll hide a good chunk of it in the ground. Maybe something like this. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so that's looking better. And then we'll kind of do the same thing. We'll go around, we'll look at, okay, and this back here, obviously that's pretty bad. But we know that the user, whoever is experiencing this is going to be able to see it from the back. So let's go ahead and maybe I'll take just another big platform. Maybe we'll scale them up. And then maybe let's just kind of, pack it in here just a little bit. Okay, so that's better. I'm not too worried about the bottom of it. Let's make sure that it's not. Oh, we're gonna have to move our tree a little bit since it's getting in there. Okay. All right, so that's actually looking pretty good. So that's that first part of kind of breaking up the transition points, is using the geometry. So we start there, and then the next thing is we'll kind of go in and let's fill in these other little areas where the trees intersect. And this is the point where we can start using a little bit of vegetation. Okay, so with vegetation, there's an approach that I like to take. You can choose however you want to do this, but I typically like to go from the largest elements to the smallest. What do I mean by that? So we can see with our vegetation that ships with this pack, right? We've got some of these bushy type things, we've got some big trees, and some flowers. Minus the trees, we're going to kind of focus more on the bushes to the grass. Now, bushes are bigger typically in life than our grass, and so what I want to do is I want to focus first on filling in kind of these bush pieces. Now there's two ways we can approach this. We can hand place objects, or we can use our foliage tool in Unreal. So to start with, I'm actually going to hand place a couple of these, again, to kind of help ground and root some of this. So as this is our focal point, I want to kind of place some things, maybe rotate a little bit, maybe a little bit of scale, but I want to fill in these gap points. So if you remember what we did with the rock section here, where we had those really hard transitions, the same principle applies in this one with the vegetation, right? So we've got two trees, kind of this cove, kind of little nook here, but it's a very harsh transition. So I'll come in here, maybe add this little flowering bush. Maybe we'll place one here. Like that looks pretty good, helping to break that up. Maybe we'll add another one of these guys. Maybe just scale them down a little bit. Maybe I don't know, maybe we can tuck them back in there. Again, there's no right or wrong, but obviously use your reference so it looks realistic. Same thing back here. Maybe we'll put another one of these guys here. We'll scale them down, just some little flowers. That looks totally fine. We got a little nook here. Maybe we'll do something a little different. Let's see what these guys look like. Nah, that's probably too small. So, okay. You know what I'll do? I'll put one of these larger ones in the middle. Just like this, kind of sticking out. And then we'll put another little small one. So drag him down. And we'll scale him up a little bit. Okay. So starts at that point. So I think you're kind of getting the point of kind of hand placing some of these vegetation pieces. So that's one approach that we can take to help kind of fill in these little areas. The next one is actually using the foliage tool. So we'll jump to that, but we'll still stick to the same principle that we're not going to touch grass yet. We're just going to do our bushy like stuff. So let's go ahead and focus on that. So with the foliage tool, I'm going to go ahead and just grab all the meshes that I know I want to use in my foliage. I'll leave the big trees. We'll leave the sticks for a little bit later too, but I'm just going to grab these bushes, the flowers, and the grass. So I'm going to take those and I'm just going to drag them into the foliage tool. Now by default, you'll notice that all of them are checked, which means as I start painting, it's going to paint everything. So to do that, we can select all of them. You can press spacebar, which will unselect them, or you can just click. But same thing. Let's start with. I'm going to grab this. Actually, you know what? Let's kind of do. Yeah, we'll do this bush and some of these guys. So I'll keep him off. We don't want the grasses or the other ones. So okay. So these are the three we're going to start with. Now, if I paint again, you can see super dense. Not very realistic. So first thing I want to do is take my paint density down to 0.1. Now we can set it per mesh instance, we can set it here with the density. However, I find it a little bit easier just to do it with the paint density, because then if you needed more, if you needed less, you know, you could go down, and that's probably a little too light. I'll go 0.05. You can see that it doesn't change. It's where it's painting in the world. So I'll take this to 0.1. We've got our guy selected, and then the other thing that I want to do is actually give some random scale. You know, because if you look at all these guys coming in, they're all the same height. Now, granted, if we look at the 3 bush, so we want a little bit of variation in there. So I'll go ahead and just undo that. And I think, actually, let me double check here. So if we're just painting this guy bush A, that's not bad on scale. I'll keep him, so I'll select him first. Minimum, let's do like a 0.8. Max, let's do like a 1.5 or something. Actually, we'll go a little bit less. We'll go 0.5, maybe 1.2. So as we start painting, you can see we get some variation. That's actually probably too low. Okay, so we'll keep it at that. Now select these guys. Go ahead and activate them. Deactivate this one. And go through here. And the only reason why I'm doing this is I want to get my scale set out of the gate. So these guys are probably a little too large. So I'll take him. Maybe our min is 0.3. Maybe our max is 0.4. So let's see. Okay, that's probably a little too small. We'll go 0.4, maybe 0.6. Again, just to give us some variation. All right, that actually looks pretty good. Okay, so I'll go ahead and put this guy back on. So we're painting with these 3. And all I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go in, again, using the same principle that I mentioned before, looking at places where we have very hard transitions. And I'm just going to simply click maybe once. Okay. If you hold down Shift, that'll actually erase what you did. So you may see me kind of adding things and removing things. Okay, that doesn't look very realistic. So what's happening here is it's actually aligning to the normal of our base static mesh, which I guess I should have mentioned too. If you find that when you're starting to paint these in your foliage tool, it doesn't actually do anything. By default, I think it comes in just for landscapes, BSPs, and painting on other foliage, I think is disabled. So in order to paint on static meshes, which we've added to our level, just simply click the static mesh tab. So, okay, so we unchecked align to normal, so this should keep them all vertical. Oh, actually just this guy. So select these ones all at the same time, uncheck align to normal, and there we go, it's painting vertically. Okay, cool. So let's go in here, like I said too, we'll just kind of fill in just some of these blank spots. And we don't want stuff kind of going through our other meshes, but maybe we'll add some stuff here. Maybe we'll fly over here. Maybe add some of this on the rocks. Maybe we'll come up here from where we had our hand placed. Oh, nope, we don't want that. Okay, we'll come back here. There we got a little kind of rock ledge here. All right. Again, I think you get the point of painting the foliage. Again, the idea is that we want to find these hard transition points, and we want to break them up a little bit. Okay, so I will use my, actually we'll go rather small, so let's go down like 0.25, actually I'm sorry, 25. For our brush size, let me go ahead and hide some of these guys that are, or remove them that are in between. Maybe paint a little bit more. Okay, there we go. So we're starting to break up those finer points. Actually, a little bit here. Make it look like the card's been there for a while. Okay, so that's the second part of this, where we go in and we break up a little foliage. Now the third part is, of course, adding grass. And again, I like to save that to the very end. So I'll select these guys. I'll uncheck them. Now this bush B that we have here is kind of a grass in my opinion. Like, it's got little grass flowers on top, and it's a little bit thinner. It's not nearly as prevalent as these other guys. So I'll keep this one. We'll go to these grasses. We'll go ahead and select them. Actually, you know, let's turn off the other grasses. Let's make sure our scale is good on this one. Yeah, that's coming in a little big, so we'll select it again. Maybe min is 0.5, maybe max is 0.6. Let's see how this looks. I might actually increase my brush size and my density to say maybe like 0.25. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better. I think we can, on our variation, go a little bit smaller. So let's go, say 0.35, uncheck align to normal, and this guy's good to go. All right, and then we'll select these grasses, and let's do the same thing. Let's paint. That's actually not bad for the max scale size. So let's just do our min. Maybe we'll do 0.8. And then we'll make sure align to normal is unchecked. And I think that should be, Yeah, that's actually looking really good. Okay, and then let's go ahead and put this one on. So now when we paint our grass, we also get those little flower breakups, and that's really pretty. So, okay, we'll go 0.4, and then we'll just start filling in some of these others. So we'll blend the others, so the little bushes that we put in look kind of funny by themselves, so we'll kind of just start there. We'll fill that in. Maybe we'll do this guy over here, maybe some grass up there. Down here as well. Again, just blending all three of these together, right? So we've got our trees, we've got our rock intersections, and then we've got our static meshes as well. We'll come in here, maybe add a little bit more, fill this guy in. I really like what's happening back here, which is making it feel very, very lush, very luscious, very alive. That this, maybe this tree is, I don't know, a mother tree that, gives life or something. That's why it's worshipped. I don't know. Pick your own story. All right, so there we go. Maybe fill back in here. Maybe a little bit on the stairs. Okay, so that kind of rounds out the principles that I wanted to cover with the actually creating your diorama, creating your story. So if you recall, right, we placed our big kind of platform here, and then we put our focal point, our theme, which it was this, kind of mother baobab tree. And then we built the little platform for it. That was our starting point. The next point that we did is we helped to blend the transitions from each of the static meshes so it didn't look as harsh. That's where we added those steps, a little bit of rocks to help kind of build it up. The next step that we took was actually kind of filling out the rest of the scene a little bit more with either it was more static meshes, like our pots, our trees, to help just kind of make it feel a little bit more lived in and less barren. And then finally what we moved on to is adding the little vegetation pieces to break up even further those harsh transition points. So there's nothing super fancy, I will say, about this. This isn't like the most impressive diorama I've ever made, but I think it highlights all the core principles that are needed for creating our diorama, for creating your diorama. So that is the starting point for part one in this, and then what we'll do is we'll eventually transition to lighting this and making it look much better. So stay tuned for that one. I will release that in the second video. And then we'll take a look from there. So thanks for watching.